Let's start by putting the key in the on position and putting the shifter in neutral. Now we can make our way under the hood to the negative battery terminal. Use an 8mm to loosen it and remove it from the battery. Make your way back inside the passenger compartment. We're going to come to the lower kick panel underneath the steering column. We have to remove the plastic. To do that, you're going to find two 7mm headed bolts. Now once you have both of those out, move along to the hood release latch. Go ahead and pull on that. Underneath that, you're going to find two more 7mm headed bolts. Remove the pair. Now we can carefully grab onto the plastic. I'm going to grab onto this and I'm going to try tugging it away from the lower aspect of the dash. Go ahead and give that a quick inspection and set it aside. Now that we have that off, let's continue on by removing this metal plate. To remove this, you're going to find 5 8mm headed bolts. Let's remove all of them. Set that aside. Now let's move along to this area right here. We're going to start removing the 3 Phillips head screws from this hole here, here, and all the way over on the driver's side. Now I'm going to reach up along the driver's side of the steering column and I'm going to tilt my steering wheel down as far as I can. Now I'll use a trim tool and I'll carefully separate the 2 pieces of the clamshell. Go ahead and grab this. We'll carefully pull it out of here. Give that a quick inspection, set it aside. Next, we're going to go ahead and remove this area here. This is the adjuster for the tilt of the steering. Go ahead and take that off of there, set it aside. Grab the lower clamshell, remove it from the steering column. Now let's have a peek underneath the steering column area. We're going to come over towards the passenger side and start disconnecting our wiring harnesses. We'll start with this green one. Press on the little locking tab there and separate the 2. Now for this center one, you're going to have 2 locking tabs, one on either side. Gently separate them and remove the wiring. We'll move along to this one. Now let's move along to our overdrive switch wiring. Just carefully get in between here and separate that as well. Quick inspection. We can move along to this wiring right here. For this one, it's going to be easiest to separate after you remove it from its mounting bracket. Up along the top here, there's a little push clip. Just carefully get in between there with something that you can pry with. To separate this, there's a rectangular tab where my thumb is. Go ahead and squeeze that and separate it. Have a little peek. Set that aside. Now let's come to our shift indicator bracket. You're going to find that you have a 5.5mm bolt that holds it in place on the steering column. Go ahead and remove that, and then we'll remove our red cable from the shifter. Moving along to the driver's side of the steering column, we're going to have to remove this wiring harness from the lower aspect. Right in here, there's a 7mm headed bolt. Remove it. Now we'll use our pick. We're going to come over to this wiring harness. There's a tab on the forward side of this. You can't see it, but generally if you just grab it with the pick, gently get in between, separate the tab, you should be able to pull this down. Continue on with a trim tool or a prying device. We're going to go ahead and separate the wiring from this metal bracket. Now we're just going to make sure we have the steering wheel in the locked position. Let's go ahead and take the key out of here. Grab that steering wheel. Make sure you hear it click in so it cannot turn. Now let's make our way underneath the steering column all the way to where the steering shaft goes down and through the firewall. You're going to find that the steering shaft has a 10mm pinch bolt that goes straight on through it and it holds it to the steering column. We need to remove that pinch bolt and then slide the steering shaft off of the steering column. To get this off of here, I'll give it a couple loving bonks with a pry bar and a hammer. Now this part's going to be a little bit harder to access. You want to make your way right inside this area, and then what you want to do is find this. You can go ahead and carefully pop this off of here using a prying device, such as maybe a trim tool or even a screwdriver. It should pop off fairly easily. Give it a quick inspection, make sure it's still reusable. Now let's move along to this area right here. You're going to find a metal bracket, and if you follow it to either end, you're going to find a 13mm headed nut. Let's remove the pair. For this last one, I'll make sure I'm holding the bracket. Go ahead and remove that bracket. And now we're going to take one of our mounting nuts and we'll just start it back on the mounting stud. Now let's move along the steering column to this crossbar. On the forward side of the crossbar, on either side, you're going to find another 13mm headed nut. For the one on the passenger side, we're going to go ahead and loosen that, remove it, and then just put it back on a couple threads. After that, we'll move over to the driver's side, fully remove that one, and leave it off. All right, now it's time for some heavy lifting. Go ahead and grab onto that steering column and lift it up. Remove the forward nut that you left on there a couple threads. Now we can just carefully lower this down so we can gain access to our last mounting point for the shifter cable. To get this out of here, I'm going to use a pick and something that I can reach in here to push on this with. The reason for the pick is because down underneath where the cable goes into the bracket, you're going to find a hole. Use the pick, press it in, and then go ahead and slide the cable out of here by pressing it forward. Let's carefully grab this and remove it from the vehicle. Now with this safely on the bench, let's continue on to the wiring here. I just want to take it out of its mounting points. You can see that there's one hook here. Just carefully get underneath that and pull it up and out. Make our way over here. At this point, we have plenty of slack from this. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to lift this up. Now I'll turn this around. On the other side, you're going to find a locking tab. You're going to want to press that in so we can lift this up and off of here. Now we'll just go ahead and slide this right up the arm. Now with this slid up the handle, let's move down to the pivot point. You're going to find that you have a pin that comes through from this side down and through. So to drive it out, we'll come to the far end, give it a couple bonks, and then we'll drive it out with the punch. Give your pin a good inspection. Make sure it's still reusable. If it's rotted or damaged in any way, you have to go ahead and replace it. Ours looks fine, so I'll set it aside. Grab onto that handle, give it a little wiggle, and remove it from the steering column. Quick inspection, set it aside as well. Reach in here, remove your rubber bushing. Go ahead and wipe that down, give it a close inspection. Typically, it's a good idea to go ahead and replace these. This one looks fine, set it aside. Now I've spun this around so you can have a closer look at this area. We're going to continue by removing this and this bracket. To do that, we're going to remove 3 T30 torque screws. Go ahead and grab onto the unit. We'll give it a little pull, and we're going to slide it off of this lever. Now this all stays together because there's a locking clip. Just give it a close inspection. Make sure it's still together. It's supposed to wiggle around, but it should not fall apart. After your inspection, set it aside and we'll move along. Before we continue, by removing the shifter tube from the steering column, I always like to wait on the brackets and I move along to this area. I want to remove this pin so I can take this lever out. Just going to give this a couple bonks, break it free. Now you'll notice that this pin is different than the other one. You need to keep in mind which one goes where. Grab my punch out of here. Now we can pause on this area and we'll continue on by removing our bracket. We'll use our T30 Torx bit for these. Now we can carefully grab onto this, we'll give it a little wiggle to break it free and remove it from the steering column. Now we'll continue taking this apart. Looking at this side, you're going to find 2 more T30 screws. Go ahead and remove them. Just keep in mind that this is under spring pressure. I'll carefully separate this. Shouldn't want to go too far. We'll give that a close inspection, wipe it down, and set it aside. Now we can make our way back to this lever. We're going to grab onto it and carefully slide it out of here. Give it a quick inspection, wipe it down, and set that aside as well. Now we can take this, tip it up, and slide out the plunger shaft. Now we can take the spring off of the plunger shaft. We'll wipe that down and inspect it as well. There's the plunger shaft. Now what we need to do here is take that new plunger shaft. We're going to lubricate this entire thing. I'm going to start down at the end here. It's a good idea to just put plenty of grease on here. The more the merrier. It's going to prevent wear over time. Take that spring, put it right on there. Now we'll just go ahead and lubricate everything else along the way. It's always a good idea to make sure you get inside each of the slots where the levers are supposed to go. Now we'll take this and we'll slide it in. As we're sliding this in, you want to make sure that you have the slots on the plunger lining up with the slots on the shifter tube. Right in there. Now let's lubricate our lever. Once again, more the merrier. Go ahead and take that and slide it right on through. If it doesn't line up, just move the plunger shaft around as needed. Now let's have a look at our two pins. For this, we're going to be using the one without the head on the end. We'll save this one for later. Go ahead and take this and slide it through from the bottom area here. It's going to go right up through the hole. Once again, move everything around as needed to make it fit. Once it starts wanting to go in, just give it a couple loving bonks to drive it home. Once you get it started, go ahead and give it a couple loving bonks with a hammer to drive it in. Make sure it's flush and completely bottomed out. Now we can start putting our bracket on here. Looking at it, you can tell that it really only goes on one way, otherwise the holes will not line up. It's going to be a little difficult because it is going to be under spring pressure. Just keep that in mind. I'm just going to line this up, and then I'm going to see if I can start in both of my bolts. Once I have them both started, generally you can just go ahead and tighten it, and it'll compress everything as needed. Little here, little there. Go ahead and pull on that lever a little bit. That functions fine. Now that we have the other side together, let's continue on with our lubricant down in this slot. Let's continue with our rubber bushing. One side of it has a cutout. The other side does not. The side with the cutout needs to go towards the side that has this shaft protruding. Slide it right in there. Now we'll put some lubricant on our shifter handle. Let's slide this in here and line up the holes. Now we can take our other pin, the one that does have the flat head on it, and we're going to start putting it down and through. You, of course, want to make sure you have this in the proper direction. If you put it in backwards, it's going to bind on something. So you want to make sure you have it in this exact direction. I'm going to grab my hammer. We'll give it a couple bonks to drive it in. Now I'll just go ahead and turn this, and I'm going to put it on top of a shallow socket. I want to make sure that the hole of the socket lines up with my pin that I'm pushing in. We'll go ahead and drive this all the way down and through until it's completely bottomed out. It's important to make sure that this is completely bottomed out. You do not want either of your pins to fall out while you're driving down the road. Let's go ahead and test this. It's perfect. Now let's move along to our steering column. It's important to make sure we clean and re-lubricate everything. The areas that we're going to clean is inside of each of these grooves and then down along where this lever is. We'll get everything clean and then re-lubricate it. Let's go ahead and take this and we'll put it in position on the steering column. The next thing I like to do is take more lubricant and come right up along the top of these rubber bushings. Now we can take each of our brackets, we'll put them in position, start in each of the mounting bolts. Snug them up. Double check to make sure they're tight. Next, we're going to test its functionality. To do that, go ahead and grab the key. Before you do anything with the key, I need to mention it's very important to make sure once the key is in and turned to the on position, you do not turn the steering wheel in any way. The only thing we're doing is testing the shifter to make sure we did not switch the pins around backwards. I'll take the key, put it in the on position. Now I can grab that shifter, I'm going to give it a little squeeze, I'm going to try to run it through the gears. It should want to pivot all the way. If it can only go a little bit, typically it means either this pin or the other pin is in backwards. If that's the case, you have to go ahead and remove both of these bolts, the caps, turn them over and remove the pin and switch it around. Ours works fine, so we can continue. Now we can get this back in position. We want to make sure that we have this shaft down inside this area here. You can see the groove. This should want to slide right in. Just wiggle things around as needed to make everything line up. Now as I start lining up the holes, I'm going to start putting in the mounting bolts. It's important to make sure each one of these bolts starts in by hand so you do not cross thread them in. If you cross thread them in, more than likely you're going to have to try to drill and tap and then even maybe get new bolts. Overall, it's going to make it a hassle. That's snug. Now we can start putting this rubber protector down. As we start sliding it down, you want to make sure that you have your locking mechanism for it lined up with the corresponding slot. Also, on the other side, you can see you have a hole in this area. Up along the top area here, you're going to find a little piton that it slides right over. Go ahead and line everything up and latch it in. Give it a wiggle to make sure it's secure. Let's make sure we remount our wire. This part's very important because you don't want it to get tangled and damaged in any way. All right, at this point, double check your work. You want to make sure you tightened everything, you test its functionality, and of course the wire is safely remounted to its bracket. Now we can go ahead and get this back in the vehicle. All right, so let's go ahead and put this back in the vehicle. Looking inside under the dash, you can see that we still have one of our mounting nuts on the far right stud. We want to leave that on there so as we put the steering column in, we can rest it there, and then we're going to continue on to our cable. As you slide this in, be very careful for all of your wiring and cables that are located behind this area. All right, so I have it resting on that one nut. Now I'm going to move along to the cable. I'm going to slide it back into its bracket and then lock it on. Now I'm going to reach under the dash. I'll grab my cable. I'm going to slide it into the slot and try to make sure I lock in my little piton. There we go. I heard a little click. Now I'm going to grab onto it. I'm going to try as hard as I can to pull it out of there. I want to ensure that it does not fall out. Super important. Now we can take that other piece and we'll put it onto its lever. Press that right on. You can use a pry bar or your thumb. Once it's on there, of course, give it a tug. Once again, it needs to be secure. Let's lift up that steering column, Now I can start putting on my mounting nuts. I'm going to start with the far forward driver's one. Get that on there a little bit, leave it loose. Now we'll go ahead and tilt up the steering column here. We'll line up the mounting bolt holes. Now I'm going to hold that up. I'll start my bracket on there and then start on each of my mounting nuts. Now while that's still loose and we can wiggle it around, I'm going to continue on with the steering shaft. I'll line it up and slide it up and onto the steering column. Now the next thing we're going to do is take our pinch bolt. If you're not replacing the pinch bolt, it's important to at least make sure you use some blue thread locker. Go ahead and slide it right through here. We'll bottom this out and then we're going to torque this to 25 foot-pounds. Now we can tighten all of our mounting nuts that hold up our steering column. Let's continue by reattaching our wiring. We'll start with this large one and then snug up your 7mm headed bolt on the driver's side. Alright, so right there it bottomed out. I'm just going to take it a little bit further just to make sure it's snug. Of course, I'll give every electrical connector a tug once I feel as though I have it connected in. Now let's move along here. We're reconnecting our overdrive switch. Got a nice click there. Give it a tug. Now we're going to re-secure this. Just go ahead and slide that right up into the bracket. Now we can come over towards the passenger side. We'll continue over here. Green to green. In there. Let's get this large connector in here. Give it a nice tug. Re-secure it. Let's get this little 3-wire connector reconnected as well. Now let's continue on to our indicator wire. We're going to take this and we'll put it right up over the hook. There we are. Now we'll bring the indicator bracket down and put it onto the steering column. After that, we can put in our 5.5mm bolt and snug it up. Now we can make our way above the steering column to the dash. We can see exactly where the shift indicator is. Now, of course, at this point, you want to match up the indicator to whichever gear you're in. For us in particular, we have this vehicle in neutral. So all I want to do is go ahead and turn that little cog until my indicator is right over the N. After that, I'll continue shifting into each of the gears and make sure it lines up perfectly and adjust accordingly. Turning it this way, you can tell it's moving away from the N. I need to go the other way. At this point, I have it pretty much directly in the center of the N. You don't want to stop here. Like I said, go ahead and test all of the gears and make sure it lines up. Perfect. Now we're going to take the tilt rod and start it in there a few good threads. We don't need to tighten it yet because we will be re-removing it. Once it's in there, go ahead and give it a tug and tilt your steering wheel down. Let's put on the upper clamshell. Let's make sure we line up this area here. It should want to slide right down. Do the same on the other side. That was easy. Let's remove that tilt lever again. And now we can reinstall our lower clamshell. As you bring this up, you want to make sure your tabs line up with their alignment points. Once you feel as though you have them lined up, continue on with putting in your 3 mounting bolts. Once they're all started, snug them up. Go ahead and put on your tilt knob again. We'll screw this in by hand as far as we can. Then we'll go ahead and cover it with a rag and give it a little snug with some pliers. Let's get this metal protective plate on here. As always, line up all of your bolt holes, start in all of the bolts, and then snug them up. Now we can put on our lower trim panel. Looking at the back side, you're going to find that you have pitons that protrude out from either side of it. Those need to fit into their corresponding holes in the dash. Go ahead and wiggle it around until it feels like it lines up and press it in. Make your way under here and start in both of your mounting bolts on either side. We'll leave those loose and we'll continue on to our hood release. Get this lined up, I'll go ahead and start in both of my mounting bolts. After I have both of these started, we'll snug all 4 of the lower bolts. Let's go ahead and reconnect our negative battery terminal and make sure it's nice and snug. Okay friends, we got our steering column back together. Of course, now at this point, you're going to want to make sure that you test its functionality one more time. Put the key in the on position, run it through all the gears. After you're sure that it functions properly, go ahead and put it back in park, turn off the ignition. Start it up, run it back through the gears. As you get into reverse, make sure it starts backing up. Put it in drive, make sure you go forward. Aside from that, go ahead and take it for a road test, and of course, I recommend checking your alignment. Thanks for watching.